been solved. And I just heard, I think, an EVP,
I
not
heard
to.
something. Yes, I did.
The murders have not been solved here, and it's been over 100 years. So the murderer, or murderers, because it was a whole family, could have been more than one person, they more than likely are dead and gone and took this dirty secret to the grave with them, leaving a tragic mystery for the remaining family members of the Moores and the children who were staying with them. It was in 1994 that Darwin and Martha Lynn purchased the house and restored it to its original condition at the time of the 1912 murders. Their intentions were to make it a true crimes tourist attraction, but in the end, they only received about 18 visitors a day. However, once paranormal groups caught wind, of the home and its past, visits skyrocketed from 18 to nearly 200 a day. Now, reports from these investigations, they state that the most common occurrence include hearing people talk and whisper, and hearing the sounds of random noises such as bangs and movement. Dark figures have been spotted on many occasions as well, and they're usually lurking within the corners of a room. They hear the humming of a woman sometimes when touring the home. There is also talks of being uncomfortable when in certain areas of the home as well. Now, to add to the mystery and even allure to this home, it was reported that on November 7th, 2014, a paranormal group had rented out the home for an investigation when around 12:45 a.m., which was the estimated time that the family was murdered, one of these investigators began stabbing himself.
Wow.
Horrific, right? He did survive that night, and one could only make assumptions. Does the murderer still lurk and try to take yet another life and add to the tragic events? We'll never know. But that investigator would not talk about the incident after the fact.
Makes you curious as to what was going through his mind.
To stab himself repeatedly, absolutely.
Well, next is the Joshua Ward House, and it's located at 148 Washington Street in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, this large brick mansion was built for a retired sea captain turned merchant, Joshua Ward, in the mid-1780s. Now, George Washington stayed here while visiting Salem in October 1789, the honored guest of Joshua Ward. And it was built on the land that once belonged to Sheriff George Corwin, a.k.a. the Strangler. Corwin was one of the most notorious interrogators and witch killers in American history.
Oh, my.
During his time as the sheriff, he made a reputation for himself as being a sick, sadistic monster whose methods of interrogations were unusually cruel. Now, just as an example, his favorite method to get the supposed accused witch to admit their guilt was to tie them from their necks to their ankles until a fountain of blood would rush from their nose.
Horrible.
That is horrible. And another famous interrogating skill he used often included torturing the prisoner for hours and then crushing them to death with a large rock afterwards. Needless to say, most of the supposed accused never had a chance to even admit their innocence and were killed no matter if they truly were guilty or not.
Horrible.
Well, all in all, Corwin was responsible for the deaths of 19 men and women, most of which took place within his own basement that he had constructed as a personal jail.
Wow.
When Corwin died in 1697, he was originally buried in his own basement, but his family feared people may retaliate against him, so they moved his body years later to an undisclosed cemetery. When graves are moved or disturbed, this can make spirits restless and confused. So, as you can imagine, building the Joshua Ward House directly over the top of where Corwin once lived, committed murders, and eventually died made a perfect recipe for paranormal activity.
Absolutely. And with that, we will be right back after this short break with more Ghost Talk. You are listening to Ghost Talk Radio on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal
Welcome back.
Experience
23 minutes past the
broadcasting
hour.
live out of
You are
Birmingham,
listening to Ghost Talk Radio with me as your host, Shelley Robertson, and joining me is Kristen Boyd. And if you just tuned in, we have been discussing haunted crime scenes. And if you missed the first part of the show, no worries, folks. You can catch the show archive on Spreaker, Google Play, and iTunes at your leisure. I invite all our listening friends to join us in chat at WBHM-DB.com, where you can ask us any questions you may have. I also want to remind everyone, all of the places we are talking about this evening are real locations, and many are still standing. I want to advise, please do not visit any of these places without proper permissions, as trespassing is against the law, which could get you arrested and a hefty fine. Now, prior to break, we were talking about the Joshua Ward house, and we didn't quite make it to the actual hauntings of that house. So how about you carry on with that? That is so interesting.
Okay, so what people have come encountered with, they have had burning scratches on their arms and backs. And
Oh, my.
A lot of visitors have reported that. There have also been accounts of 3 main spirits that haunt there. The Strangler himself has let it be known that he is present by choking people visiting the home.
Oh, my.
Unpleasant.
Yes.
Another spirit is said to be of Giles Corey, a man who was tortured and killed by Corwin after being accused of being a warlock. Now, it is said he is accountable for trash cans being knocked over, books being pulled from their shelves, cold spots, and the candles that are found in a puddle of melted wax, even though they have never been lit. Now, the third and most famous spirit recorded in this home is that of an innocent woman who was accused and killed for being a witch. Now, her apparition has been caught in pictures that have been taken Her most notable appearance is her wild black hair that seems to float around her.
Now, I had also heard that someone has actually captured that photograph. So I was looking to see if I could find that photograph, and I haven't found it, but I would like to see it.
Because I have seen it.
And so where does that take us next, Kristen?
It takes us to the Grimes sisters.
Mm-hmm.
This one's kind of creepy and interesting. So the crime scene and haunting on the German Church Road in Chicago, Illinois. There's a huge story to this one as well, and a couple books have even been written about these two girls and this horrid crime that was committed. But again, we'll be touching bases on the key points of this story. On the night of December 28, 1956, 15-year-old Barbara and 13-year-old Patricia Grimes ventured out to see the Elvis movie, Love Me Tender. Now, unfortunately, they never made it back home. It wasn't until 3 weeks later their bodies were found dumped on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. Now, a construction worker came across their bodies, frozen and completely naked, lying in a position that suggested that they had been thrown from a movie.
Oh, how horrible.
Well, Barbara's chest was covered in shallow stab wounds, but none of which was bad enough to be the cause of her death. In fact, it actually was never clear at all what had actually killed them.
Interesting.
Now, here's where the tragic story of these sisters gets weird and even paranormal. So multiple witnesses confirmed seeing the sisters board the bus to head back home from the movies, only for them to get off halfway through the trip. Just a few short minutes later, two boys claimed seeing them laughing and giggling with each other just 2 blocks away from their home. Then a security guard claimed that they had stopped and asked them for directions the morning of the 29th.
That's supposedly after they've been dead.
Exactly. Well, a classmate then claimed to have seen them that evening from a restaurant window walking with 2 unknown girls. Then on December 30th, 2 separate employees stated that they checked into a nearby Claremont hotel. Now, considering that the autopsy report placed their time of death within 5 hours of leaving their home from the movie on December 28th, these reported sightings and encounters are quite unexplainable and even a bit bizarre.
Absolutely, they are.
That's not all. Actually, on January 14th, a week before the girls' bodies were discovered, the phone of Patricia's classmate Sandra rang sometime around midnight. Sandra's mother answered, but the caller hung up. A few short minutes later, the phone rang again, but this time a small, frightened voice asked for Sandra. But before Sandra could get to the phone, the caller had hung up. Now, Sandra's mother swears that the voice was of Patricia Grimes, even though the autopsy would say that she had been dead more than 2 weeks at that point.
Wow.
So needless to say, this crime still boggles the minds of people that were surrounded by it, and it continues to be an unsolved crime.
Yes, and I think we've heard of other crimes that have been unsolved where the people are living and they're getting old, and it's kind of heartbreaking because they want resolution, you know?
They should be able to get that.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the next haunted crime scene, and it's called the Sallie House in Atchison, Kansas. It is also the birthplace of Amelia Earhart, and it holds a reputation of America's most haunted town, if you can believe the stories that are told about the old houses that are along the squares of the streets. Now, one house in particular, it sits at 508 North 2nd Street, and it has been written about, featured on TV shows, and has been a magnet for psychics of all kinds since the events that happened there happened. Now, this house also became known as the Heartland Ghost, which that happened from 1990 to 94. It is said that in 1906, Dr. Charles Feeney awoke to an urgent knock on his door. At the door stood a desperate mother with a very ill daughter Now, Finney, after examining the girl and finding an infected growth on her abdomen, insisted on immediate surgery. Now, at this point, it's unknown exactly what occurred. The girl